Today we're taking a look at all 31 NHL teams, and I'm going to give you my opinion on who I think their MVP was for the 1920 regular season. We'll jump into that coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned today, we're looking at all the league MVPs. I'm going to give you my opinion on all 31 teams and who their best player and most valuable player was for the current season. Of course, we're not too far away now from being able to have more nominees and candidates for NHL awards being established. The Professional Hockey Writers Association have been filling in their ballots, so I thought it'd be a fun exercise to go through and let you know who I think all these MVPs would be for each team, and you can leave me your comments down below and let me know who you think who are the MVPs for each team as well. So let's get started, and we have 31 teams to cover. First up, we have the Anaheim Ducks. This one was a little bit tough, but I'm going with goaltender John Gibson. Gibson's a great goalie, and I have kind of some fears here that his career is almost being wasted given the recent struggles of the Anaheim Ducks. They need to go through a bit of a rebuild, which GM Bob Murray is certainly doing right now. But looking around the rest of the roster, I think probably Adam Henrique might be the next closest thing to an MVP that they had this year. I think they would have won far less games without Gibson in the net. I know his stats were down a little bit this year, but I think that was largely due to the team in front of him. And I still think overall John Gibson is their best player. Next up, we have the Arizona Coyotes, and I'm going to actually split this one between Darcy Kuemper and Connor Garland. Kuemper, to me, really should have been their MVP, and really, if he would have played more games, wouldn't have been injured, would have been the hands-down MVP on this team. He certainly had a tremendous year, and their solid goaltending was a big part of the reason why they won the games that they did. Obviously, they still struggled to score offensively, and they really, like I said, if it wouldn't have been for the backbone of the team and Kuemper, they wouldn't have won as many games as they did. But Connor Garland was by far their best skater on the team, putting up 22 goals and outscoring other top guys like Taylor Hall and Phil Kessel. Garland had another breakthrough season and continues to be a bright spot for the Coyotes. Next up, we have the Boston Bruins. I'm going with David Pastrnak. Even though they have a really solid group of players, they have a couple other guys who would be in the conversation like Marchand and Bergeron. Pastrnak had an MVP season, in my opinion, and will likely be a finalist for the Hart Trophy. He was scoring at an incredible rate and just too valuable not to pick Pastrnak for the Bruins. Next up, we have the Buffalo Sabres, and this one as well was a pretty easy selection. Jack Eichel by far is hands down the brightest spot in Buffalo, even though the team has been struggling to make the playoffs and certainly going through a rebuild, which feels like forever. Eichel is by far hands down the team's best player night in and night out, and is definitely this season's MVP. Next up, we have the Calgary Flames, and I'm selecting Matthew Tkachuk, who put up 61 points in 69 games, was their leading scorer, and really provides a lot of intangibles for this team. He plays physical, is quite an agitator, gets under the skin of a lot of their opponents and throws them off. He's willing to drop the gloves. He's done so on a few occasions. He really, like I said, he's just become a really solid all-around leader for this team, and in my opinion, Tkachuk was the MVP for the Flames for the 1920 season. Next up, we have the Carolina Hurricanes, and I'm going with defenseman Jacob Slavin. Slavin is an incredibly underrated defenseman in Carolina, plays huge minutes for them, often playing 23 to 24 minutes per night, put up 36 points and was a plus 30, and he put up, really, those points are more impressive considering he really doesn't get a whole lot of power play time. Dougie Hamilton probably would have been my selection if he would not have got hurt. He was on pace to have an incredible season, but the injury derailed things. He still had 40 points, which was still quite incredible. Sebastian Aho deserves to be in the conversation for this as well, but in my opinion, the amount of minutes that Slavin plays, especially a lot of it shorthanded on the PK, plays in all situations, to me, it's just a little bit more valuable and deserves more credit than what he normally gets. Next up, we have the Chicago Blackhawks, and this one was an easy one. You probably saw this on the thumbnail. Patrick Kane, again, had a hands-down MVP season for the Chicago Blackhawks, putting up another solid campaign, leading them in scoring with 84 points, playing over 21 minutes a night as a forward is another impressive season. By far, the most offensive threat in Chicago. Kubalik probably was the runner-up for me. Another nice surprise rookie season for him. Jonathan Toews had a decent year as well, but Kane by far is the Hawks MVP in my opinion. Next up, we have the Colorado Avalanche. This one was relatively easy as well, even though they have numerous offensive weapons. Nate the Great, Nathan MacKinnon, gets my vote for this award, putting up over 90 points, plus 13, over 21 minutes. Likely could be a finalist for the Hart Trophy as well. McKinnon's really broken through here in the last few years and has become one of the league's dominant players. Next up, we have the Columbus Blue Jackets, and I went with a defenseman here, Zach Werenski. Now, of course, Werenski and Jones is one of the top defense pairs around the NHL. He put up 20 goals from the blue line on a team that doesn't really score a ton of goals, put up over 40 points, was playing over 24 minutes per game. You could argue Seth Jones is just as, if not more important than Werenski, but unfortunately Jones went down with a pretty serious injury, missed a lot of time. In my opinion, Werenski really stepped up and took the reins here and deserves to be MVP. Next up, we have the Dallas Stars, and I'm going with their goaltender and their backbone, Ben Bishop. Bishop's had another solid year. In my opinion, was more consistent than guys like Tyler Seguin or Jamie Benn. Seguin and Benn have certainly been more inconsistent as of late, but Bishop's always there to really keep things under wraps. They were a solid defensive team again this year, largely due to his performance. He had a goals against average of about 2.5 goals per game and a .920 save percentage, and again, was a big part of the reason why Dallas was able to get themselves into the top 4 seeds in the Western Conference as we head into this 2014 playoff format coming up this summer. Next up, we have the Detroit Red Wings, and I'm going with their future captain, Dylan Larkin. Larkin was one of the few bright spots on this team, along with a guy like Tyler Bertuzzi. Mantha wasn't too bad either, but it was injured a fair bit again. Larkin put up 53 points, led the team in scoring, and as we've heard from the Yzerman recently, they are going to be naming a team captain before next year, and I fully suspect Larkin will get the honor. We have the Edmonton Oilers, and I'm going with Leon Draisaitl. Of course, his buddy Connor McDavid is not too bad either. McDavid put up 97 points, and even though McDavid would win this award most of the time, Draisaitl was just a little bit more valuable this year, putting up well over 100 points, 110 to be exact, and likely going to be winning the Hart Trophy amongst the league leaders here. He will certainly be a finalist for sure. Leon was just a little bit more dynamic than McDavid this year. Next up, we have the Florida Panthers, and we're going with Jonathan Huberdeau. Huberdeau led the team in scoring with 78 points, was the second highest time on ice for forwards amongst his team behind Alexander Barkov, playing 19 minutes per game. Was a tremendous offensive force. Barkov's offensive numbers were down a little bit this year, but Huberdeau was always there to keep them going. Next up, we have the LA Kings, and I'm going with their captain and longtime forward, Anze Kopitar. Kopitar had 62 points this year, led the team and led the forward group a nice time with 21 minutes per game, plays in all situations, and certainly not quite the season that he had a few years back when he was putting 80-90 points up on the board, but still was their leader and best player all year in my opinion. We have the Minnesota Wild, and I'm going with youngster, a little bit of a surprise here, but Kevin Fiala had a breakout year, leading the team in scoring with 54 points. After having a tough time being adjusted to Minnesota when he first arrived there, he certainly broke out this year, proved that he is a really solid young player and could be a big part of Minnesota's future, and in my opinion was their best player this year. We have the Montreal Canadiens, and I'm going with forward Thomas Tatar, who led the team in scoring with 61 points. Certainly Shea Weber would be a close second in my opinion in his importance. Weber arguably is their most important player along with Carey Price, but Tatar just proved to be that much stronger this year, led the team in scoring. Certainly some question marks around his future with the team, put up career numbers at a later age in his career, but certainly was well worth the risk when they made the acquisition, getting him back in that Max Pacioretty trade a couple of years ago. Next up, we have the Nashville Predators, and I'm going with their captain and top defenseman, Roman Josi, who, like Jacob Slavin, who I mentioned earlier, is incredibly underrated, does not get the credit he deserves. He certainly deserves to be in the conversation for the Norris Trophy, if not the winner this year. He had a tremendous season offensively and defensively, putting up 65 points, plus 22, averages between 25 and 26 minutes per night. Nashville really didn't have a great season, but they certainly would have had a much worse season if it wasn't for Yossi's efforts. Next up, we have the New Jersey Devils, and we're going with forward Kyle Palmieri, who has led the team with 25 goals and 45 points. Not a lot of bright spots in New Jersey this past year. Another really tough season. Saw them trade Taylor Hall, Blake Coleman, and others, but Palmieri continued to be another solid performance and was by far their MVP in my opinion. Next up, we have the New York Islanders, and we're going with their top center iceman, Matthew Barzal. Guys like Barzal and Nelson and others have really stepped up and made sure that didn't happen. They've actually made some good strides forward after losing their former captain. Barzal led the team in scoring once again as one of the league's younger dynamic players. Will be very interesting to see how Barzal's next contract works out as he's a pending RFA this summer. Next up, we have the New York Rangers. This one was relatively easy. One of the best players in the league this past year, Artemi Panarin, probably going to be a Hart finalist, at least I would think so. Panarin was an incredible signing for the Rangers this past offseason, one of the most sought after free agents, and certainly seems to be well worth the money at this point. Put up 95 points, played over 20 minutes per night, and was a huge part of their success. Next up, we have the Ottawa Senators, and I'm selecting Thomas Chabot as their MVP for this year, even though he didn't have quite the offensive outbreak that many thought he would have after following up last year's performance. Chabot still had an incredible impact on this team, always leading them in ice time, one of the top big minute munchers around the NHL, averaging over 26 minutes per game, and still putting up very respectable offensive numbers. Certainly some younger forwards on the team like Brady Tkachuk and Anthony Duclair, who had a breakout year, even Connor Brown, all deserve to be in the conversation for this, but in my opinion, Chabot was their most valuable player, and likely will be for many years to come. Next up, we have the Philadelphia Flyers, and I'm going with forward Sean Couturier, who was second on the team in points with 59, plays in all situations, averages over 20 minutes per game. Certainly fair to say he's their most valuable forward, pretty much on a nightly basis, and given the fact how their blue line and goaltenders have worked out for them, I think it's fair to say Couturier is their most valuable player this year. Not to say that their blue line and goaltending were weak this year, but in my opinion, he was their most dangerous forward, most consistent player all season long. Next up, we have the Pittsburgh Penguins, and we're going with Evgeny Malkin, who once again led his team in scoring. Penguins were a team who battled several injuries this year, and guys like Crosby and Gensel were out for extended times, and Malkin certainly picked up the pace and was there to lead them the way. It will be interesting to see how a healthy Penguins team looked in this year's playoffs. Next up, we have the San Jose Sharks. This one was a little bit tough for me to select because obviously they didn't have a great season, but we're going with Erik Karlsson. I had to narrow down to Karlsson or Burns, and even though he didn't have a tremendous year, I still think he had the best season out of all the Sharks players. Karlsson still managed to put up 40 points this past year, while only playing in 56 games and still averaging well over 24.5 minutes per game. Still an impressive year considering what he's gone through injury-wise in the last few years. Next up, we have the St. Louis Blues, and I'm taking last year's MVP of the playoffs, Ryan O'Reilly, who continued to be a dominant player for St. Louis, leading them in scoring, and certainly plays in all situations. Will be in the conversation for the Selke Trophy again. Certainly one of the better two-way forwards. He's great on face-offs, and really just all-around top, most consistent player for the Blues night in and night out. There certainly had some other guys who had great years, including Perron, Pietrangelo. The goaltending was good as well, but I think O'Reilly was the most valuable. Next up, we have the Tampa Bay Lightning, and we're going with forward Nikita Kucherov. Now, Victor Hedman's certainly pretty important as well, as is Vasilevsky, Stamkos, and others. They have a very deep team, but based on the performance this year, I think Kucherov deserves this honor of being the team's most valuable player. Not only did he lead the team in scoring, but he led it by a substantial margin, being one of the more healthy guys to play in most of their games this year. Next up, in the Toronto Maple Leafs, this one was a relatively easy choice for me as well. I had to go with center iceman Auston Matthews, who was one of the top goal scorers in the league, putting up 47 goals. Unfortunately, was not able to make the goal for 50, where this NHL season was paused and then cut short due to the pandemic. Would have been interesting to see if he was able to hit that magic milestone that many guys that are top goal scorers strive for. Matthews had an incredible year. Certainly had lots of help from his teammates, but Matthews, in my opinion, was by far head and shoulders the MVP of the Leafs this past year. Next up, we have the Vancouver Canucks. Now, the Canucks were a team who had some great candidates, and more than one guy could have been involved in this, but I selected goalie Jacob Markstrom. Obviously, JT Miller had a breakout year for them. Pettersson was good. Hughes was good. All-around great performance by many guys, but the part of me that selected Markstrom was during his time that he was injured, it was very clear, very apparent that they were exposed, that without Markstrom in the net, they just were not the same team. His play was the result of a lot of great wins and a lot of great performances in front of him, and just really overall Demko was not able to pick up the slack when he was out, and he just proved how valuable he will be. It was the Washington Capitals, and we went with the guy who's nicknamed Johnny Norris this year, John Carlson, who certainly will be a strong contender for the Norris Trophy. Very well might win it as well. Led the team with 75 points. When a defenseman like Carlson can outscore guys like Backstrom, Kuznetsov, and Ovechkin, that certainly goes to show how strong his season was. He was a plus 12, played almost 25 minutes a night, and certainly outpaced the scoring of Ovechkin, who certainly deserves to be in the conversation as well. 48 goals, another awesome year from Ovi, but Carlson will get the nod this year from myself. Next up, we have the Vegas Golden Knights, and I've selected their MVP to be Mark Stone. Mark Stone is certainly another guy who doesn't always get enough credit, but he certainly had a tremendous offensive year as well as a two-way play, which is always strong night in and night out. He has a great stick, one of the best guys for takeaways in defensive play that, like I said, doesn't always get the credit he deserves, but certainly proved it with Vegas again this season. Was second on the team in scoring, and was by far one of their most consistent forwards night in and night out. And last up here, we have the Winnipeg Jets, and they had some great performances as well, but to me, they wouldn't have been anywhere near what they were without goaltender Connor Hellebuyck, who, in my opinion, deserves the Vezina Trophy. He was the backbone of the team once again this year. The blue line in front of them was drastically changed and much weakened this year, and he still put up a good fight to keep them in the games. He finished with a 2.57 goals against and a 922 save percentage, which in my opinion was especially impressive given the decor in front of him. Certainly some strong performances as well from guys like Scheifele and Connor, but Hellebuyck, in my opinion, deserves this award. Keep in mind, this is just my opinion. Let me know what your opinions are down in the comments and we can discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.